It was Oscar Wilde who once declared, "I can resist everything except temptation. I can resist everything except ... I'll let you fill in your own dots. I'm far too busy filling in mine. Today is the first Sunday in the church's season of Lent. On Ash Wednesday, we gathered, placed ashes on our foreheads and hands, and commenced a Lenten journey together. We are quite familiar with today's reading from the Matthean community. There are some texts in Scripture we never hear at all. There are some we hear once every 3 years, and then there are some which we hear every year, and this is one of those stories. The temptations of Jesus are found in each of the 3 synoptic Gospels, and I think that's one reason why we hear them every year. The Markan writer deals with the temptations in a single verse. The Matthean and Lucan communities have access to oral traditions, they have access to Mark's one verse, and possibly a further written text which is no longer extant. As Margaret Mayman pointed out last week, with regard to the story of the Transfiguration, we are not dealing here with fact, but neither are we dealing with fiction. We are certainly not listening to a history or a biography in the usual sense of those terms. Gospel stories give us a combination of memory, told within diverse oral traditions, combined with the interpretation. What does the figure of Jesus mean for the community telling the story? The Jewish Matthean community sees the figure of Jesus as the new Moses. Last week, Moses was on Mount Sinai for 40 days and nights. This week, Jesus is in the wilderness for, you guessed it, 40 days and nights. Moses is actually one of the great tragic figures in the Hebrew Scriptures. One of the great tragic figures. Moses leads the people of Israel out of slavery in Egypt and through the wilderness for, there's that number again, 40 years. And in our text today, Moses is on the mountain. He can actually see the promised land, but he never makes it. Moses dies on the mountain and is left in an unknown burial place. Hope and the possibilities of new life have been glimpsed, but not realised. Christians are very good at ignoring the tragedy inherent in the figure of Jesus, the new Moses, the God who is crucified. Glimpsing hope, but never quite getting there, is also the tragedy of people living with an active addiction. In our text today, the wilderness is not a desert retreat. It's not a romanticised place of renewal and refreshment and relaxation. It's a place of temptation, of hunger and thirst, a crucible of inner struggle and torment. The story of the temptations prefigure the tragedy of the crucified God, and thus speak to the mortality of our human journey. I certainly don't recommend the movie, but Mel Gibson got something brutally correct when he named the Passion as the last temptation of the Christ. The last temptation, death itself. Every week in our church building and in the Pilgrim House community room next door, about 150 people gather in 10 different groups following a 12-step recovery program. These are people who are or have been in the wilderness of addiction. The groups meeting at Pitt Street focus on alcohol, smoking, overeating, dependent relationships, and relating to other people who are themselves living with an addiction. There is a specific cross-recovery group for LGBTIQ people, but I hasten to add that LGBTIQ people are not recovering from being LGBTIQ, but facing issues to do with alcohol or smoking or the other addictions I've mentioned. Of course, the list of addictions doesn't stop with the ones that are meeting in our building every week. It extends, of course, to the use of illicit drugs, the misuse of prescription pills, compulsive gambling, or compulsive sexual behaviour. And in case you're just starting to feel a little bit smug, don't forget the addiction to money, the addiction to possessions, the addiction to power, not to mention emails, Facebook and Instagram. And for some religious people, the addiction is to moralistic self-righteousness. Addiction to moralistic self-righteousness. And I've thought over the years I would love to run a 12-step program for them, until I realised I'd probably have to join. Now, I'm not suggesting that everything that most of us enjoy and do on a regular basis, such as eating or going to Mardi Gras on a rainy day, is an addiction. It's the relationship to the substance or the behaviour which is at issue. And it's the relationship to the substance or the behaviour which, in my mind, touch on matters of faith, of where we place our ultimate concern. The Matthean temptations are materialism, living by bread alone, power, ruling all the countries of the world, and idolatry, worshipping a false god. It is this, the third temptation of Jesus, which is most relevant here. If the word God has something to do with ultimate reality, or, as people say in 12-step groups, a higher power, then people trapped in addiction are worshipping a false god. They, or more correctly, we, have given in to the third temptation. Addiction and the grace of recovery is not solely an individual matter, though many scientists now accept that there is a genetic basis for some addictions. Social, cultural and political factors do play a role, as do issues of gender, gender identity and sexuality. There is no shortage of false gods. We worship the god of consumer capitalism. We worship the false god of economic development, which justifies destroying the only home we have. I could go on, but I want to talk about an amazing thing. It's called grace. We see it every weekday in this building. Women and men who have been able to be honest about their addiction, reach out for help, and slowly receive the strength of mutuality and community one day at a time. In 12-step groups, people use the word God, but have some difficulty, just like a number of us here at Pitt Street. A solution that some 12-step people have found is to use the letters GOD as an acronym. Here are two examples that I've heard. When I was compulsively gambling every day, my life was chaotic and unpredictable. Now I don't do that. I have good, orderly direction. That's God for me. Or, when I was swallowing far too many Valium tablets after breakfast and watching daytime television, I never left the house. Now I don't do that. I go for a walk in the local park and appreciate the great outdoors. That's God for me. My favourite acronym for GOD comes from Alcoholics Anonymous. In AA, some people state that AA is a gathering of drunks. That's God for me. I believe this is a profound statement of faith. The amazing thing we name as grace is found in gathering. We can't do addiction or temptation or simply living by ourselves. We need others. We need what the theologian Carter Hayward, herself a recovering alcoholic, describes as the power of mutual relation. We are not alone. That's God for me. This amazing thing we name as grace is found in a gathering of drunks. Not a group of people who have got their shit together and are running the world, running a political party or a business, or even, dare I say, the church. But a 12-step group is a gathering of broken people, a group of people in need of healing, wholeness, and community. It's the grace we see when we gather around a common table, sharing bread and wine, and declaring that for everyone born, there's a place at the table. That's grace enough for me and my justice-seeking friends. That's grace enough for all of us. Amen.